Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are here to transform vast quantities of research, dense articles, and some really highly focused personal notes into a clear, immediately useful blueprint.
That's the goal?
And today we're taking on something I think truly ambitious. A deep dive into the blueprint for cognitive reinvention.
Right.
We're focusing specifically on how neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, can be harnessed to fundamentally upgrade your skills and really your identity over the next 2 years.
And that's the core mission. We're moving beyond the abstract idea that, oh, the brain is plastic. We want to deliver a step-by-step actionable formula.
Yeah, a real plan.
Exactly. We've synthesized this material, which is, it's heavily rooted in what's called the Hebbian principle, into a practical guide.
And the central concept, the fundamental rule that governs everything we're about to discuss, is summed up perfectly in the sources. It's this. Your brain becomes exactly what you repeatedly feed it. It's like a closed-loop system, and your inputs are the master control panel for your future abilities.
We want to give you that control panel. Everything we discussed today funnels into one powerful, memorable formula. If you follow along, the entire journey of reinvention can be summarized in this one chain.
Okay.
Effortful new input leads to neurons firing, which through intense repetition leads to neurons wiring.
Right.
That results in a robust new network, which yields a new skill, and ultimately, over time, forges a new identity.
And that right there brings us to the most counterintuitive part of this whole thing, the most essential element, really.
Yeah, this is the key.
We're going to reveal the biological necessity of confusion, of frustration, and of failure. We're going to show you why that uncomfortable feeling, that resistance you feel, is not a sign that you should stop.
Or that you're not good enough.
Exactly. It's not a sign you lack talent, but it's the explicit signal that your brain is attempting to execute a fundamental structural upgrade.
Discomfort in this context is not a bug in the system. It's the absolute core feature of genuine growth.
Let's unpack why. Okay, so let's start with where most people live, cognitively speaking. The brain's default setting. We're calling this the problem of autopilot, or what the notes call pilot mode.
Pilot mode is all about efficiency, pure efficiency. Your brain, above everything else, wants to conserve energy.
It's lazy.
Well, not lazy so much as optimized for survival. So if you aren't actively challenging it with novel or demanding input, it will always choose the path of least resistance.
Which means?
It falls back on the highly efficient pre-myelinated neural pathways you built years ago, the superhighways of your mind.
The danger here isn't incompetence then. It's stagnation.
Exactly. If you just keep using the same pathways, you are stuck in a cognitive loop. Life becomes predictable, sure, but your competence level plateaus and your overall intelligence, your ability to process and generate new insights, it just stays completely flat.
You're not getting any smarter.
Not in a meaningful way. Think of it like a really efficient road system that only connects 2 points. Your desk and your couch. It's a great system for that one purpose, but if you never build a new off-ramp, you can never get to a new city.
So your brain just becomes a recycling center for old information.
Right, instead of a manufacturing plant for innovation.
The notes have this real-life illustration that's, well, it's pretty jarring. The example of college professors who teach the exact same material using the same set of slides for 10 or 15 years straight.
I've seen this.
They become masters of those slides, right?
Yeah.
Do it in their sleep. But their intellectual competence, their ability to generate novel connections or explore challenging new fields, it just stops growing.
And they feel competent because the task is so easy. But no new neural firing is happening because there's zero cognitive friction.
So they're just running on maintenance power.
They are in pilot mode.
Yeah.
And to switch into what we're calling growth mode, we have to introduce the activation principle. And it always begins with effort.
So the notes define this as a kind of formula.
Yeah, simple one. Effortful input triggers stimulation of neurons, which leads to firing, which then leads to wiring, and finally, a new network.
That initial effort, that moment you try something truly new or confusing or frustrating, that's the catalyst.
It's everything. When the input is effortful, the brain has to process data that violates its existing mental model. It has to handle a prediction error, reroute information, and struggle to find a solution. That internal struggle, that cognitive friction, is the direct physical stimulation needed for neurons to fire.
And that firing, that electrical signaling, is the absolute non-negotiable first step.
You cannot skip the firing. If the input is easy, your existing network just handles it silently. Nothing changes. You have to force the brain to handle confusion or mild stress or failure. That's what forces new neurons to become active and start communicating with each other.
You know, the history of high achievement is basically the history of people forcing themselves into growth mode through intense effort. We can look at some famous examples of this kind of cognitive load.
Yeah, let's do that.
Take Albert Einstein. He solved these enormously complex physics problems, often without any physical tools, just through mental visualization, intense thought experiments.
Right. He was forcing a sustained, heavy mental load. He was repeatedly activating his parietal and frontal lobes, the regions for spatial reasoning and executive function, just to manipulate abstract concepts in his head.
That's not passive daydreaming.
Not at all. It was intensely effortful simulation, a process that demanded continuous new firing to build those incredibly complex, abstract thinking networks.
Okay, then you have someone like the chess legend, Bobby Fischer. His genius wasn't just some innate talent he was born with.
No, it was a direct consequence of extreme, focused effort. He spent 10 to 12 hours a day just studying, analyzing, and memorizing specific chess positions and combinations.
That's a huge volume of input.
It's a massive volume. That sustained, intentional effort led to massive structural rewiring in the parts of his brain dedicated to spatial and pattern recognition networks. The sheer cognitive load of holding those complex patterns in his mind, predicting outcomes, that guaranteed the intense firing that built that wiring.
And what's crucial here is that this principle applies just as much to physical skills, motor skills.
Oh, absolutely.
Consider Kobe Bryant. His mastery wasn't a gift. It was a consequence of relentless, specific repetition, practicing 800 shots every single morning. That meant systematically firing the exact same motor circuits again and again and again.
And the intention there is all about precision. He was building and strengthening those motor pathways until the skill became completely automatic and error-free.
So all these examples, they just confirm a single truth for you, the listener. The intensity and the specificity of the input directly dictates the strength of the firing and then the subsequent wiring.
You have to make it hard on purpose.
Which leads us directly to, I think, the most powerful and maybe the most uncomfortable insight from all this material, the biological link between struggle and genuine neuroplasticity. It's codified as the no pain, no gain principle.
And the notes summarize this in a really striking line. No painful input means no newly shaped neural architecture.
And that's not a motivational poster.
No, this is not motivational speaking. This is cellular biology. If you are comfortable, you are not forcing your neurons to update their connections. That is the biological essence of neuroplasticity.
So we need to be really explicit about what these painful inputs are. We're talking about the necessary growth triggers.
Right.
Things like failure, intense frustration, genuine struggle, profound confusion, that feeling of cognitive overload when you're tackling a complex task.
And even social discomfort, like the acute embarrassment you feel during a difficult public speaking engagement or a socially awkward conversation.
Why are those feelings so critical?
Because they serve one, and only one, purpose. They signal to the brain in the most explicit terms possible that the current mental model, the existing efficient wiring, is simply insufficient to solve the problem at hand.
Okay, so how does the brain actually register that inadequacy? Where's that error signal coming from?
It's generated by a specific area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC.
The ACC.
Think of the ACC as the brain's supreme monitor. It constantly tracks the difference between what you predicted would happen and what actually happened.
Prediction error.
A massive prediction error. When you fail, or when your current knowledge model is just not enough, the ACC registers this huge error. It essentially screams, "Alert! Current operating system has failed."
And what's the brain's physiological response to that alert signal? What happens next?
The ACC releases a key neuromodulator, noradrenaline. You might also know it as norepinephrine. Noradrenaline is one of the most potent chemical signals for attention and novelty. It acts as the explicit, high-priority signal to the rest of the brain. It's basically saying, hey, cortex, divert all resources. The existing pathway failed. We need to stop the current process, pay absolute attention, and initiate structural change. We need to rewire.
This just changes the entire perception of failure, doesn't it?
Completely.
So if you're struggling with a complex spreadsheet or trying to articulate an idea clearly and you just stumble and feel that rush of frustration.
That feeling is the noradrenaline release. It's the
Yeah.
chemical trigger for the process of neuroplasticity. You are literally failing your way forward.
Wow. So you should welcome that feeling.
You should, because it's proof that the system has successfully registered an error and is preparing to build a better solution. If you quit at that moment of frustration, you get all the painful input without any of the subsequent rewiring.
And that rewiring itself, as we said earlier, is solidified through repetition. The effortful input has to be followed by repetition.
Yes. The initial noradrenaline burst creates the urgency, but repetition is what builds the highway. Firing the same neural groups repeatedly, getting them synchronized, is what strengthens the wiring. This is why practice has to be consistent, even when it's uncomfortable. It ensures the skill eventually moves from conscious, slow effort to automatic, fast competence.
We have to pause here because this brings up a really important distinction based on listener feedback we've gotten. If struggle is so vital, why do so many people just burn out? Where is the line between desirable difficulty and just sheer overwhelm?
That's a critical question. The source material talks a lot about the zone of proximal development. We're aiming for the sweet spot of challenge.
It's a sweet spot.
Desirable difficulty means the task is hard enough to trigger that ACC error signal, but it's still manageable enough that you believe success is possible with sustained effort.
Okay.
If the task is so far beyond your current ability that the error signal becomes paralyzing or chronic, leading to sustained high-level cortisol release, it switches from activating plasticity to promoting stress and shutdown.
So the goal isn't to struggle perpetually. It's to find the edge of your ability, fail productively, integrate the lesson, and then immediately push that boundary a little bit further.
Exactly. And the repetition phase, where you practice the grammar, solve the math problems, or apply the critical questions, that's where you manage the difficulty. You make small, consistent gains.
And the scientific validation for all of this is pretty profound. We touched on the London taxi drivers, whose hippocampus grew through years of spatial struggle. But let's look at the work of Michael Merzenich.
Mersenich's experiments were game-changing. They demonstrated that intense, focused effort changes the physical structure of the brain, even in mature adults.
How did he show that?
His research on sensory maps, for instance, he showed that if you forced an animal to use its finger in a highly specific, intense way and effortful input, the cortical area dedicated to representing that finger would physically expand.
It would get bigger.
It would physically get bigger, stealing real estate from adjacent areas that weren't being used as much. The message is just crystal clear. Your brain's real estate is dictated by the energy and attention you dedicate to its training. It is constantly remodeling itself based on demand.
Okay, so we have the why, the necessity of effort and pain. Let's shift our focus to the how.
Right.
What's actually happening inside your skull when those neurons wire? This is where we get into the deep science, the cellular mechanisms.
Let's get into the nuts and bolts. We have to start with the foundational axiom, Donald Hebb's 1949 statement, neurons that fire together wire together.
A classic.
It's a simple concept, but the mechanisms that make it real are complex and, well, they're utterly fascinating. We need to understand the 4 primary cellular mechanisms that are driving this wiring process.
Well, let's start with the strengthening of the connection itself. What exactly is long-term potentiation, or LTP?
LTP is the physical, long-lasting strengthening of communication across the synapse, which is that tiny gap between 2 neurons. When the first neuron, the presynaptic one, consistently fires and successfully triggers the second one, the postsynaptic neuron, especially during the kind of high-frequency stimulation you see with learning, that postsynaptic neuron becomes more sensitive to the signal.
How does it get more sensitive? What's happening?
Well, the mechanism, which was discovered by Bliss and Loma back in 1973, involves inserting more receptor proteins into the synaptic membrane. Imagine the synapse is a river crossing. LTP is like not only widening the bridge, but also setting up bigger, better, faster docks on the receiving side.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, so it ensures that the same signal strength will produce a much stronger electrical response in the future. This is the physical basis of memory storage and circuit strengthening.
Okay, so LTP makes the road wider. Now, let's talk about making the signal travel faster. That's the role of myelination, right?
Myelination is maybe the clearest explanation for the incredible speed gap between a beginner and an expert. There are these cells called oligodendrocytes, and they wrap a protective, fatty sheath that's the myelin around the axon of a frequently used neural communication cable.
And why is that so critical?
Myelin acts as an insulator. It prevents the electrical signal from dissipating or leaking out. This allows the signal to jump rapidly between gaps in the myelin sheath, and that speeds up transmission by up to 100 times.
100 times.
100 times. So if LTP is widening the road, myelination is turning that dirt road into a fiber optic superhighway. The faster the signal travels, the faster you can execute the complex sequence of actions required for a skill, whether that's, calculating a derivative or playing a perfect piano concerto.
So experts aren't just thinking differently.
Their signals are literally traveling exponentially faster.
We've strengthened the connection, we've accelerated the speed. Now, how does the network itself physically expand?
That's where dendritic branching comes in. Dendrites are the receiving antenna of the neuron. When our neuron is subjected to intense, consistent stimulation from effortful input like learning a new complex concept, it physically grows new dendritic spines.
So it's growing new branches.
Literally, it's growing new receiving ports. This is the brain's way of saying, okay, I need more inputs to solve this new problem. And studies using live imaging have actually shown this physical growth, the sprouting of new spines, can happen within hours of intense, focused learning.
Within hours?
Yeah, it just shows the immediate responsiveness of the brain to demand.
And finally, the ultimate change, creating entirely new computing units. Tell us about neurogenesis.
Neurogenesis is the process of generating entirely new neurons. And contrary to the old belief that you're born with all the neurons you'll ever have, we now know this occurs in adult humans, primarily in the hippocampus.
Okay.
Now, the quantity of new neurons is small compared to the total, but their creation is crucial for new learning and memory formation.
And the sources really emphasized a key way to increase this process.
Oh, absolutely. The research is crystal clear that consistent aerobic exercise increases neurogenesis by 2 to 3 times.
How?
It happens through the release of BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Think of BDNS as fertilizer for the brain. It not only promotes the survival of new neurons, but it also strengthens existing synapses through LTP. It basically links the physical health of your body directly to the plasticity of your mind.
So those four mechanisms, LTP, myelination, dendritic branching, and neurogenesis, that's the physical reality of this effort-reward cycle.
It is. But we have to address the critical nuances that dictate whether this wiring is successful or not.
Okay, so what are those nuances?
One of the most important is that timing matters. This is known as spike timing dependent plasticity, or STDP.
What does that mean?
It means that for two neurons to strengthen their connection, they have to fire sequentially and within a very precise, tiny window of time. We're talking about 20 to 40 milliseconds.
Why is that timing so critical? Give us an analogy.
Okay, imagine two friends, neuron A and neuron B, trying to synchronize a high five across a busy street, which is the synapse.
Right.
If neuron A sends the signal and neuron B receives it and fires back immediately, within that tiny window, they've successfully executed the high five. Their bond strengthens. That's LTP.
And if they miss?
If neuron A fires too early or neuron B fires too late, the high five fails, and their connection either stays the same or it might actually weaken. That's a process called long-term depression.
That's powerful. It means that chaotic or distracted learning is it's fundamentally inefficient.
It's completely inefficient because that level of precision demands focused attention. Without intense, sustained attention, the brain doesn't optimally release the key modulatory neurotransmitters, acetylcholine and noradrenaline.
The permission slips?
They're the chemical permission slips for the plasticity mechanism to operate. If you're scrolling on your phone while trying to learn a new language, the neurons might fire randomly, but they won't wire strongly.
And this loops right back to our original point about the role of emotional salience.
Exactly. Emotionally charged experiences, whether it's the excitement of a breakthrough or the frustration of a failure, get tagged by the amygdala, our emotion center. This tag basically tells the hippocampus, hey, this memory is highly important, prioritize it. The discomfort of effort ensures the brain pays attention and flags that memory for processing later during sleep.
The cellular mechanisms confirm how change is possible.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the scientific proof that sustained, effortful input physically changes the brain's macroscopic structure. We have 4 major case studies that serve as irrefutable evidence for our blueprint.
Yeah, this is the fun part.
Let's start with the iconic London taxi drivers.
Eleanor Maguire's 2000 study on these drivers is still the gold standard for adult human plasticity driven by cognitive effort. The process of gaining the knowledge, this multi-year intensive memorization of 25,000 streets and thousands of points of interest, it's just a forced cognitive challenge of the highest order.
So what were the physical results of that intense effort?
The MRI scans revealed that, compared to control groups matched for age and general intelligence, the taxi drivers showed a statistically significant 7% larger posterior hippocampus,
And that's the part of the brain for spatial memory.
specialized for spatial memory and navigation.
And the study went even further than just confirming that size difference, didn't it?
It did, and this is the crucial part. They found a dose-response relationship. The volume of the posterior hippocampus was directly correlated with the length of time the driver had been on the job.
So more years of effort meant a bigger structure.
A bigger structure. But, and this is key, the use it or lose it factor was also demonstrated. When drivers retired and stopped actively challenging that spatial network, the volume of that specific hippocampal region began to shrink back toward the average. It proves the brain is dynamic, it's constantly adapting to demand.
Okay, our second case study highlights how effort can remodel both motor and sensory regions. Professional musicians.
Right. Musicians dedicate tens of thousands of hours to precise, high-speed motor control and incredibly complex auditory processing. The resulting structural changes are they're so clear.
For example.
Studies show they have a significantly larger auditory cortex. It can be up to 130% larger in those who possess absolute pitch. This is the brain physically building bigger hardware to handle the volume and complexity of sound.
And beyond sound, their motor control changes dramatically as well.
Absolutely. Their training results in an expanded motor cortex representation that's dedicated specifically to the fingers, the brain area that controls the hand that's used most like the left hand of a violinist or the right hand of a guitarist, is physically larger.
Wow.
And they often show an enhanced corpus callosum, that's the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the two brain hemispheres. And that explains their superior ability for inter-hemisphere coordination, which is necessary for complex playing.
So does this only work if you start as a kid?
That's the common belief. But the notes emphasize that while early onset of practice provides the greatest advantage, adult musicians still show significant plasticity. The process is available regardless of age.
The third case study is vital because it proves that genius can be manufactured, not just inherited. Memory champions.
This one is my favorite. When McGuire studied these champions in 2003, we're talking about individuals like Ed Cook, who could memorize a deck of cards in under a minute. The finding was revolutionary.
Which was?
They showed no innate structural differences in the size or volume of their memory-related brain regions compared to the general population.
So their incredible memory wasn't a biological accident.
Not at all. Their genius was a consequence of intensive, effortful training using a specific strategy. The method of loci or the memory palace.
Right. They mentally navigate a familiar space, a palace, and place objects to be remembered within it.
Exactly. And by using this method so intensively, they forced their memory networks to engage with their spatial navigation networks in the hippocampus. The fMRI showed enhanced functional connectivity between these two areas. Their brilliance was built by strategically repurposing existing, highly developed spatial networks for memory tasks.
So they proved that targeted, effortful training is enough.
6 months of intense practice was sufficient to construct a world-class cognitive skill.
And finally, maybe the most compelling evidence of adult plasticity under duress. Stroke recovery using constraint-induced movement therapy, or CIMT.
This therapy, pioneered by Edward Taub, is brutal. It's brutal in its intensity and its constraint.
That's the process.
Patients who had lost function in a limb, sometimes decades earlier, were forced to use that paralyzed or weakened limb for 6 hours a day over a 2-week period. Meanwhile, their unaffected limb was constrained, which eliminated the brain's autopilot solution of just relying on the good arm.
So you force the brain into a state of maximum cognitive need. What was the result?
The results were just dramatic. fMRI scans showed clear, measurable cortical reorganization. The brain physically rewired itself, reassigning motor control functions to undamaged regions adjacent to the stroke site.
So even decades after the injury.
Decades. It confirms that the adult brain retains this powerful latent capacity for dramatic reorganization, provided, and this is the key, provided you introduce the necessary intensity and effortful input to override decades of disuse.
Okay, we've established the biological mechanism and the evidence of structural change. Now let's transition to the practical framework. How do we apply this science to build specific skills?
The simple answer, defined in the notes, is that skill formation equals network formation. Every single skill you admire, critical thinking, public speaking, coding, is simply a specific assembly of neurons that have been wired together and then myelinated for expert-level speed.
So if you want to acquire a new skill, you have to identify and train the underlying networks all at the same time.
Simultaneously. For example, Critical thinking requires activating the prefrontal cortex for goal-directed attention, the hippocampus for memory retrieval, the ACC for error monitoring, and the parietal circuits for complex reasoning. You have to train all those components together.
And something like communication isn't just about vocabulary.
No, it involves the language networks, of course, but also the social emotional circuits, the ability to read the room and convey empathy, and enough working memory to maintain a cohesive argument.
And what about public speaking?
That requires auditory circuits, speech motor cortex control, and maybe most importantly, training the emotional regulation networks to manage the anxiety and performance pressure. Once you see skills as networks, the goal becomes clear. Use effortful input to fire and wire those networks simultaneously.
But again, this practice has to be difficult to be effective. And that brings us back to the science of the desirable difficulties principle, based on Robert Bjork's research.
Right, and this principle addresses the fundamental paradox of learning. The conditions that feel best for the learner are almost always the least effective for long-term retention.
Let's break down that paradox. It sounds so counterintuitive.
Okay, so easy practice, like just rereading your notes or passively watching lectures, it gives you high immediate performance. You feel smart, you recognize the material, you're confident.
But you don't actually retain it.
Retention is low, and the ability to apply that knowledge, what's called transfer, is even lower. Conversely, difficult practice-forcing retrieval, mixing up topics, solving problems without looking at the answer, that often results in low immediate performance. It feels frustrating. You might even score poorly on a self-test. But that difficulty leads to significantly higher long-term retention and the crucial ability to transfer the skill to new situations.
So the difficulty is desirable because it forces deeper processing and ensures the ACC is screaming, rewire.
That is the core function. The prediction error is the mechanism. When you try to recall something and you can't, or you apply a principle and it fails, that error signal forces the brain to update its model. And that update requires work. If the practice is easy, the brain just assumes the model is perfect and no update occurs.
Okay, so practically, what techniques can people integrate into their daily lives that are designed to maximize this desirable difficulty?
There are 4 scientifically validated methods. The first is maybe the most powerful, retrieval practice.
This means testing yourself, right? Why is it so much better than just reviewing your notes?
Studies by Roediger and Karpik in 2006 showed that actively pulling information out of your memory, testing yourself, writing down everything you remember from a chapter, explaining a concept aloud to someone, strengthens the memory far more than just rereading.
Because rereading is passive.
Rereading is passive consumption. It's pilot mode. Retrieval practice is active creation. It forces the strain and struggle that are necessary to solidify the neural pathway.
The second technique is interleaving.
Interleaving means mixing up different topics or different types of problems within a single practice session. So if you're learning math, instead of doing 20 problems of type A, then 20 of type B, you mix A, B, and C all together.
What's the advantage of that confusion?
It prevents the autopilot from kicking in. It forces your brain to constantly discriminate between skills and concepts, to select the right strategy for the right problem. This builds a robust, flexible understanding, whereas blocked practice, doing all the A's, then all the B's, only trains the brain to execute one procedure efficiently.
And the third technique, which ties into the consolidation process we discuss, is spacing.
Spacing is just distributing practice over time rather than cramming it all into one long session. When you review material after a significant gap, you force reconsolidation. The brain has to retrieve that slightly faded memory, update it, and solidify it, which dramatically strengthens long-term retention.
So you're giving your brain a chance to forget a little bit.
Just enough to make the retrieval process challenging again.
And finally, we have prediction error. You say this isn't a technique, but a mindset about feedback.
Yes. You have to actively seek feedback that generates prediction error. If you're practicing public speaking, record yourself and watch it back, knowing that the resulting cringe and embarrassment will trigger the ACC and noradrenaline. If you're writing, submit it to a critical editor. You need that external input that says your model is wrong to initiate the rewrite.
This is the centerpiece of the blueprint.
Yeah.
The daily, actionable inputs. If we're aiming for 2 years of structural change, we need high-volume, effortful firing across all these crucial networks. The notes provide 6 specific training categories. Let's make these protocols really detailed.
Okay, let's do it. We begin with A, intelligence training, designed to push those logic, reasoning, and conceptual abstraction circuits.
The sources recommend several daily tasks here. First, solving one calculus or linear algebra problem and one logic puzzle. Why the specificity of quantitative reasoning?
Quantitative tasks, like linear algebra or logic puzzles, require dense sequential processing and demand focused working memory. They force your prefrontal cortex to handle heavy abstraction and complex rules at the same time.
It's a mental workout.
It's the mental equivalent of lifting heavy weights. Even if you don't use calculus in your daily job, the act of solving one complex problem every day builds the underlying capacity for sustained mental effort.
And the other input, the explain like I'm 5 exercise.
This one is critical for simplifying complexity. You take a difficult scientific concept, a piece of economic theory, or a political position, and you force yourself to explain it in 5 sentences or less, assuming your listener has zero context.
What does that train?
It trains the synthesis networks. You're not just retrieving facts, you're manipulating them, distilling them, and prioritizing what is essential, which is a fundamentally different and more complex type of firing.
Next up, B, critical thinking training, using that core 3-question framework.
The daily input here is simple, but it's transformative. Take any piece of news, any new business proposal, any research finding, and just spend 3 minutes applying the 3 critical questions. Why? So what? Who cares?
Let's model this. If the news story is, Company X reports record quarterly earnings, how do we apply the framework?
Okay, you start with why. Why did they report record earnings? Was it sustainable growth or some one-time accounting maneuver? Why is the media even focusing on this? Then you move to, so what?
What are the consequences?
So what does this mean for the competitor, for the industry, or for consumers? What are the second and third order consequences of this? And finally, who cares? Who benefits from this information and who loses? Does this news distract from a larger, more important problem?
It's a system.
It's a systematic application that trains the prefrontal cortex to prevent passive consumption and forces you to build robust, multi-perspective mental models.
Third, C, communication training. This is about high-volume firing of the speech cortex and language networks.
Right, so the daily input has to involve producing language under mild pressure. This could be explaining one complex idea to a colleague, recording a 1-minute voice note summarizing your thoughts, or even having a deliberate, structured conversation with ChatGPT about a difficult topic.
And the focus is on short, clear, confident sentences.
Exactly. That focus on brevity helps the wiring process because it forces pre-processing. The famous example of Elon Musk is relevant here. He reportedly demands that engineers communicate their ideas in the fewest possible words.
So you do the hard work up front.
The sender performs the heavy lifting of simplification before delivery, rather than letting the listener do all the work. It builds the neural network required for conciseness and clarity.
Fourth is D, public speaking training, which leverages that pain principle directly.
This requires a structured weekly routine. Record yourself delivering a short, spontaneous 1 to 2 minute talk on a topic you know well. But crucially, you must immediately watch the recording and identify one thing, just one to fix.
Watching yourself is intensely uncomfortable for most people.
Exactly. That rush of embarrassment and self-critique is the direct, powerful activation of the ACC. That noradrenaline spike tags the experience as urgent and necessary for rewiring. By systematically confronting that discomfort, you're training the emotional regulation networks to override the anxiety and retraining the speech motor cortex.
Like Steve Jobs.
Look at Steve Jobs. His presentations appeared effortless, but they were the result of weeks of ruthless, deliberate rehearsal-intense, painful repetition.
Fifth is E, decision-making training, specifically targeting the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC, the brain's risk-reward calculator.
The daily habit here is small but powerful. Consciously articulating the logic behind one tiny decision. Why am I choosing this route to work? Why this meal for lunch? Why this email strategy? You're forcing the OFC to justify its choice rather than just defaulting to habit.
And there's a weekly habit, too.
The weekly habit is more rigorous. You analyze a complex past decision using a 4-part framework, evaluating the options you ignored, detailing the consequences, both intended and unintended, estimating the initial probabilities, and clarifying the underlying values that drove the choice.
It's like a postmortem for improvement.
It is. This analysis systematically trains the OFC to balance reward, risk, probability, and internal value alignment. It moves decision-making from an intuitive gut feeling to a structured, repeatable cognitive process.
And finally, F, attention and focus training, which is the foundation for everything else.
You have to dedicate a minimum of 10 minutes of uninterrupted deep focus daily on a single cognitively demanding task: coding, reading a complex academic paper, writing, solving a puzzle. This is what Cal Newport popularized as deep work.
Why does just 10 minutes matter if you don't feel a huge difference immediately?
Because the consistent daily resistance to distraction physically reshapes the prefrontal cortex structure. You are literally exercising the attention networks until they strengthen and resist interference. If you eliminate digital distractions, which studies show reduce learning by up to 40% because of task switching, and you focus for even 10 minutes, you're sending a powerful signal to those neurons. This attention is important. Wire this fast.
Okay. To achieve this kind of fundamental cognitive reinvention, we need a structure that respects the science of neural growth. You've synthesized the research into a 2-year roadmap broken into 3 distinct phases.
That's right. A long-term plan is essential.
Let's start with phase 1, neural activation. This is for months 1 to 6. What is the core objective here, and what should the listener expect to feel during this time?
The objective is maximum variety of stimuli. This is the period of intense firing and discovery. You should aim to try maybe 12 different skill areas: programming, learning a language, advanced statistics, public speaking, drawing, spending maybe 20 to 30 hours on each one before moving on.
So the goal isn't mastery at this stage.
Not at all. The primary goal is simply to force the greatest number of networks to fire. You are deliberately being terrible at many things.
That sounds difficult.
It is. You have to accept being a novice. Track the activities that cause the most cognitive friction and confusion. That feeling is data. It indicates the highest potential for growth. You're creating seed neural pathways and testing which areas are most receptive to new inputs. This phase is about identifying where your ACC screams the loudest.
Okay, then we move to phase 2, skill wiring. This is from months 6 to 18. This is the execution phase.
Now you select 3 or 4 core skills based on your phase 1 data. The blueprint recommends stabilizing networks like critical thinking, communication, and decision-making, plus 1 deep technical skill that's relevant to your career or your passion.
And you practice these how often?
5 to 6 days per week, utilizing deliberate practice principles.
What does true deliberate practice look like, day to day, in this phase?
It is never mindless repetition. It involves 4 steps. 1. Identify a specific measurable weakness. For example, I overuse filler words, or I can't solve quadratic equations quickly.
Okay.
2. Design targeted exercises to address only that weakness. 3. Execute those exercises under cognitive load. And 4. Seek immediate, harsh feedback. This intense repetition, combined with error correction, is what builds myelination and strengthens synapses. You're moving away from blocked practice to randomized, interleaved practice.
And finally, phase 3, integration and mastery. This is for months 18 to 24.
The goal here is complexity and integration. You're building expert-level circuits. You have to synthesize the 3 or 4 core skills you built in phase 2. This is the time to start teaching others, which forces retrieval and synthesis and reveals the gaps in your knowledge.
And creating things.
You should create original, novel work that demands the integration of all your skills, and you need to seek high-stakes challenges.
What's happening neurologically when we reach this mastery level?
The skills become highly chunked. Your brain begins to treat complex sequences, a presentation, a theorem, a coding function, as a single unit. This frees up working memory for higher-order innovation. You're no longer focused on the mechanics, you're focused on novel application.
Now, none of this intense effort is sustainable without the proper support structures. We need to detail the evidence-based optimization strategies.
Absolutely. First, sleep. This is not just rest, it's when the rewiring actually happens. Memory consolidation occurs primarily during slow-wave sleep, and REM sleep is crucial for integrating new information with your existing knowledge structures.
So what's the practical advice for maximizing sleep's effect on learning?
Consistency is vital. Aim for 7 to 9 hours on a regular schedule. And the research by Matthew Walker confirms that reviewing material immediately before sleep enhances overnight consolidation. You're essentially giving your hippocampus fresh data to process while you rest.
Second, let's revisit exercise and that powerhouse chemical, BDNF.
Aerobic exercise 30 to 45 minutes, 4 to 5 times a week at moderate intensity, dramatically increases the release of BDNF. Since BDNF promotes neurogenesis and synaptic strengthening, the timing is key.
When should you exercise?
For maximum effect, exercise should be done immediately before a learning session to prime the brain for plasticity, or immediately after a learning session to enhance consolidation. You're literally fertilizing the garden before you plant the seeds, or right after you've tilled the soil.
Third, nutrition for neuroplasticity, fueling the physical process.
You're physically building new brain structures, so the building blocks matter. Omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA, are essential components of synaptic membranes. They promote flexibility.
What else?
Magnesium is required for NMDA receptor function, which is critical for LTP, and polyphenols found in things like berries and green tea are antioxidants that boost BDNF and reduce inflammation, optimizing the environment for growth.
Fourth, attention. We have to treat attention like a finite resource we are actively trying to train.
You have to. Start small. Practice focused attention for progressively longer periods. You could use the Pomodoro technique, 25-minute focused, 5 minutes rest, and gradually increase that focus window up to 90 minutes. You must proactively eliminate all digital distractions.
Because task switching is a killer.
It reduces learning efficacy by up to 40%. Every time you break focus, you weaken the attention network.
Before we wrap up, let's quickly correct the pervasive notion of the 10,000-hour myth that came from Anders Ericsson's work.
Right. Erickson's key finding was not that 10,000 hours are required, but that the hours must be deliberate. Mindless repetition of a task you already perform well creates minimal neural change. It keeps you in pilot mode.
So what is deliberate practice?
It's always focused, it's always outside your comfort zone, it targets specific weaknesses, and it relies on immediate, rigorous feedback that generates that sweet spot of prediction error.
And the ultimate sign of mastery is transfer of learning.
Yes. Beginners learn surface procedures. Masters learn deep principles, which enables far transfer, the ability to apply principles across radically different domains.
It's like a musician applying rhythmic structures to business workflow.
Or a memory champion applying spatial reasoning to complex data sets. This requires constantly asking, what is the why behind this technique? To build rich, conceptual mental models that see relationships and hierarchies, not just isolated facts.
We've taken a deep dive today covering the mechanisms of struggle, the cellular machinery, the evidence, and the practical two-year structure.
It's been a lot, I know.
Let's just reiterate that single, powerful formula that provides your blueprint for reinvention.
It's due.
Effortful new input leads to neurons firing, which leads to repetition, which leads to neurons wiring, which builds a new network, gives you a new skill, and forges a new identity.
And the most empowering line from our sources is this. You have control of the INPUT. Firing and wiring is automatic. Your brain is a self-optimizing machine, but it requires the right fuel-consistent, effortful, strategic challenge.
So to begin this journey, remember 3 core principles. First, discomfort is data-seek the edge of your ability, because that is where the noradrenaline is flowing.
Second, prioritize active over passive. Always produce, write, speak, or create. Don't just consume.
And third, remember that identity follows action. You do not become a disciplined person by wishing it. You become one by performing the deliberate daily action 1,000 times.
And as a final provocative thought for you to take away, we saw that the hippocampus of the London taxi drivers began to shrink when they stopped using their skills. And yet, stroke patients demonstrated that the brain can radically reorganize itself even in old age, through intense effort.
Right.
Since plasticity is dynamic and lifelong, the question you should be asking yourself isn't just which new skills do I want to build over the next 2 years, but also which existing mental networks, the language skills, the emotional regulation, the critical thinking capacity, do I need to maintain and deliberately feed effortful input to just to keep my current capable cognitive self intact over the next decade?
So it's not just about building, it's about maintaining.
The work of maintenance is just as critical as the work of building.
The choice to begin the rewiring is entirely up to you. Thank you for joining the deep dive.